Good morning, all. Welcome. Feel free to drop your name, your how you identify or fit within the creative community, your pronouns, where you're calling in from today. And as I look out my window and see bright, shiny sun, any plans you have for the weekend? I'm crossing my fingers. I haven't looked at the weather, but I hope it is supposed to be delightful out. It's good to see folks. We'll get started. We'll give folks just one more minute and then we'll get started. Does that sound good, Kelsey and Richleen? Awesome.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Like always, for these webinars, if you have questions along the way, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll also hold time at the end for questions. We think we have a fairly light sort of content agenda, so that should hopefully leave more time for conversation or questions. But yeah, thanks for, hey, Anne, good to see you. All right. As more folks, all right, we will get started. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so our plan for today, here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to do a quick update on federal funding. Then we're going to talk about the big news coming out of last week, which was the governor released her economic development bond bill, which is exciting and has some really great things for the creative community and creative sector. We'll do a quick status check on the bills that are part of the creative sector agenda, and then we'll just, just a little check in on where we are in the fiscal year 25 budget process. If I were to describe the month of March, I would describe it as like a little bit of a lull before everything comes roaring into focus for the rest of the formal legislative session. As we all know, we work in a 2-year legislative session, January of the first year through December of the second year, but the legislature is in formal session through the July of that second year. And so really the do not pass go deadline for everything is the end of July. And so that's what we're all pushing towards. That's what the governor and the legislature is pushing towards and what advocates are pushing towards as well. So, but before we get there, let's talk about the federal budget. Okay, so while Massachusetts is talking about our budget for fiscal year 25, the feds are still trying to figure out their budget for fiscal year 24, aka the fiscal year they're currently in. And we know that budgets and spending plans are very different on the federal level than they are on the state level, but still, it's taken a while. And so the way that they work is their appropriations bills, we expect to see 6 of them, and the first one is expected to pass today. It includes a couple of different departments that get funded, including the Department of the Interior, which is where the National Endowment for the Arts and National Endowment for the Humanities sit. So good news, which is even though there were calls to cut and actually zero out both the NEA and the NEH, this appropriations bill will include $207 million for both agencies. That's level funding from last year. And it's important to note at this point that one of the reasons that it is level funding is because if we remember back to, gosh, was it 2 speakers of the House ago when McCarthy was speaker? I'm counting the interim as well. McCarthy made a deal with Republicans that they would return appropriations and spending to something like 2018 spending levels. And so even though McCarthy is still not speaker, there is clearly within the House a very strong movement to cut whether, to cut everything. So level funding is actually good news considering what the alternative could have been. The other piece is that in this appropriations bill, there's about $10 million that's going to sit within the NEA and the Department of Veterans Affairs to deal with, to focus on creative arts therapies and partnerships, creative partnerships between the two agencies, which is really exciting. So this is what's happening on the federal level. Now we're going to move and we're going to talk about the governor's economic development bond bill. So every 2 years, traditionally, the governor and legislature take up an economic development bond bill. Governor Healy's is called Mass Leads. There is a lot in the bill. I'm going to focus on two primary areas, the creative sector and tourism. And then I'm also going to talk for a minute about small business because creative small businesses would be eligible. So good news, the governor is suggesting that $50 million go to the Cultural Facilities Fund. What's important to note is that the Cultural Facilities Fund, which is the money is raised through bond bills, it's not through the general fund, is a program co-administered between Mass Development and Mass Cultural Council. Even though it says 50 million in here, that's 50 million assuming over 5 years, right? So that would allow the program to continue at $10 million a year, which is what it's been for the last at least 5 years. The other big development is a project that is very much a passion project for both the governor and the lieutenant governor, is a live theater tax credit program. So this program would work very similarly to how a film tax program works, which is producers who want to produce pre-Broadway, off-Broadway, off-Broadway, and tour launches, national tour launches for theater. If they do it in Massachusetts, there is a tax credit where they could submit the taxes that they paid, and they would get that money back. It is a 5-year pilot, so it would end or sunset after 5 years, and there is a $5 million annual cap on that project. So it's not unlimited resources out there. For proponents of this program, they are looking to the fact that Connecticut has a live theater tax credit, that New York State put in a live theater tax credit, which is interesting, right? Because one would think that New York state wouldn't want to, reduce money related to live theater. But what they did is they created a tour launch tax credit. So if you rehearse and launch your national tour for theater at, say, in Rochester, New York, you're going to get a tax credit from the state of New York. The other thing to note about this program is that it actually has a circuit breaker, which means that it would not go into effect until certain economic milestones have been met. And this is recognizing that we are facing a very tough budget year and financial picture for the Commonwealth, which we'll get into in a second. The other things that are included is that there would be a destination development grant program, which would have $40 million. This would prioritize basically tourism asset improvements like at, highway roadside tourism visitor centers, etc. There are also $8 million for historic preservation and then $150 million for library construction grant costs, which is really exciting. I'm going to move to talk really quickly about what's included for small businesses. So the CDFI would be authorized at $35 million. This is a program that allows disadvantaged and underserved businesses to get capital, right, to scale up their businesses. There's also a $25 million small business technology grant. And then the 10 million Biz Empower matching grants. So these are programs that are really designed to help small businesses in Massachusetts scale up. And obviously, if you own a creative small business, you would qualify. We will talk more. Hopefully, as more information comes along with that, we can share that out. So let's talk really quickly about what are the next steps. So the governor submitted her proposal, and now it goes to the legislature. And much like the budget, right? The budget gets started by the governor, and then it moves to the legislature. It will go to the Committee on Economic Development and Emerging Technologies, and then it will be these bullet points belie a lot of detail, right? So it'll go to, the House will pass their version, the Senate will pass their version, then it'll be negotiated in conference. They'll pass the legislature will pass a conference version, and it'll go to the governor to sign. So that's a lot of steps between now and when it actually will get to the governor's desk. We also know that while the governor has priorities that she included in her version, the legislature has priorities that they're going to include in their version. And so so just a flag here, Mass Creative has been working and having a lot of conversations about different bills that are part of the creative sector agenda that would make sense to include in the economic development bond bill. So just so you all know, that's probably a place where we're going to push some more advocacy coming up. You see at the bottom of the slide, it says bond bills are not sure bets. And I mean that in two different ways. Number one, last session, the legislature did not successfully pass an economic development bond bill by the end of formal session. When they came back for informal session, they managed to pass a sort of a much more modified, I would say, streamlined version of the economic development bond bill, but they had stripped out any pieces of policy. They'd it was a bare bones version of that budget. So while up until last year, I think I always would say, like, you can always count on the legislature to pass a bond bill, an economic development bond bill. Sometimes they surprise you. The other piece is, and this is just a quick reminder, is that bond bills are not the same as spending bills, annual budgets or supplemental budgets. The money that they are saying they're going to spend on things has to be raised through the sale of bonds on the bond market. So it's in some ways, and those can fluctuate, right? So number one, if you are really into municipal and state finance, you know that the more you sort of pressure those bond sales, that can affect your bond rating, which on the market, which is a big deal. And we have a very strong bond rating right now, which is a thing we want to hold on to as a state. But then the other piece is if those bonds don't sell and you're not able to raise that money, you're not able to spend that money. And so while oftentimes you will see bond bills that have an enormous amount of spending, spending ideas included, not all of them will actually come to fruition. I say this for two reasons. One, it doesn't mean we're not going to still try to figure out how to get more money for the sector in this, but if you are looking for an earmark with your legislator, which are often included in economic development bond bills, and you secure that earmark for your cultural organization or project, your job is only half done. You have to then figure out how to get the money out of that bond bill. And you'll spend a lot of time working with the Secretary of Administration and Finance and his office. So that is a quick review of what happened, what was included in the governor's bond bill, and what we see is the sort of path forward. But the governor did a couple of other things besides do a bond bill that affect the creative sector. So it's really exciting. She has signed an executive order. That's something that a governor can do at any time. They don't need to wait for anyone. They don't have to wait for the legislature to give them permission or to agree to it. They can just do it. And so the governor has signed an executive order to establish the Governor's Advisory Committee on Cultural Policy Development. It will include I believe the co-chairs, the named chairs of that committee are the Secretary for Economic Development. And I also believe that the executive director of Mott will play a large role in that committee. We don't know who else will be on that committee, but as soon as as soon as things start to move, we will let everybody know. The other piece is that within the Office of Economic Development, there's this really cool program, which I'm sure many of you know, called the Community One-Stop Grants. It is an effort to streamline grant programs and grant projects to get more money into the hands of municipalities and across the state. And the governor and the Secretary of Economic Development have prioritized applications or grant projects that would focus in or on cultural districts, which is really exciting. So it doesn't mean that if you submit a grant with, in a cultural district, you'll automatically get it, but you will add more points to your overall grant score, right? We know when you score grants, that's what it'll look like. The governor also will designate an artist in resident and a poet laureate for the Commonwealth. And then the Massachusetts Office of Tourism and Travel will come back and will produce the annual conference on tourism and travel, which this year will be April 2nd. So something to look forward to. In other bond news, the housing bond bill, which we talked about briefly, it moved out of committee. And is now with the bonding committee. So it is slowly making its way through the legislative process. It's important to note that the bill was reported out of the housing committee without any changes to what the governor recommended. So it'll be interesting to see when or how they decide to make any changes, or if they just want to move it forward as quickly as possible. And we've talked about in past webinars about what's included in the housing bond bill. All right, so a quick update on the creative sector agenda. As we talked about last month, 4 bills are moving forward: the Creative Space Preservation Act, the Place Act, the ACE Act, and the Downtown Vitality Act. We are working right now. The goal here is that just in general, very few bills sort of get passed on their own. They usually get dropped into larger pieces of legislation, like the housing bond bill or the economic development bond bill. Or the budget. So we're working right now, and we've been having conversations with elected officials about where could we drop either all of a bill or parts of a bill into various legislative vehicles to move forward. This is the back of back of housework that is really important. And here's a couple of ways that you can help. First of all, if your organization or you have not already endorsed one of these 4 bills, or all of those bills, we heartily encourage you to do that. We are going to start working on sign-on letters that coalition members will have the opportunity to sign on to, so that we can continue to share with the legislature that these bills and the ideas within these bills are fully supported by the creative sector. Also, it is always a good idea to let your legislators know that you support one or all of these bills and that you want to see them pass this session. And we're, from feedback we are getting, we are not, you all know, we don't stand up a lot of like automated emails anymore, because basically what we've heard is once we realize it's an automated email and it's the same copy, we start to ignore it. So a personalized, quick little email that you send in that just says, "Hi, my name is Emily Ruddick. I'm a constituent of yours. I live in Somerville. I'm really worried about the displacement of artists and arts activities, and that's why I really support the Creative Space Preservation Act. I know that there's going to be opportunities to move this bill forward this session, by the end of the session, and get it passed. I really am looking for your support to do that." Okay. And then the final one is, and earlier this week, we had, Kelsey and I had the opportunity to talk to the Arts Day Here folks to record a podcast. And we were talking about why does it matter about taking action as soon as possible, right? And if you'll indulge me, I'm going to use the same metaphor I used there, which is, or simile. It's a lot of times advocacy and moving bills forward is like when you're playing mini golf, right? And you get to that whale and the whale's mouth opens and closes, right? And you have to time exactly when you hit that when your putter hits the ball, so that it rolls along and it links up exactly when the mouth is opening and goes through, so you can get a hole in one. So if you wait, if you hesitate, that mouth is going to close up. If you're too early, sometimes the mouth isn't open yet, right? And you miss your shot. So that's why when we send out notices that say, there's an amendment that's being filed, we really need to get as many co-sponsors as possible, that we ask you to take action immediately, right? And give specific things that you want to ask your elected official to do, because it's just that little window that we have to move things forward. And it can seem really arbitrary, right? Like, I wish I could say, and we need you to write your legislators on May 15th, and everything's going to be great, because sometimes it just comes up. So please stay on your toes with us. And the other big thing, and it's not included on this bullet point, but another thing that you can do is you can share out these actions, and you can, whether it's your organization shares out your support with your audiences and your email list, and you urge them to take action, or you share it on social with your networks, or you share it with your coworkers. All of those are meaningful steps that you can take, because in some ways, the more that our legislators hear from constituents about these issues, the more likely it is that they will take action. Kelsey, can you just give us an inside the building perspective about that? Did I miss anything? Did I mischaracterize the whale mouth opening?
No, but I appreciate that we're still using that to try to explain the process. I was just responding to Temple's question in the chat about when legislators would consider filing amendments for funding in the economic development bond bill. So if it's okay, I'll just take the opportunity to explain that now. First, there needs to be a public hearing on the bill, and we'll let you know when there are opportunities to submit written testimony, or even to testify in person or virtually on behalf of your funding priority, and then the larger prioritization of the creative sector in the economic development bond bill. Once that hearing has passed, then the House and the Senate will figure out what their packages will look like before taking them up for votes. And it's around that time where there might be, to again use that whale metaphor, I guess, a very, very short window in which legislators will find out that the bill is coming up for a vote, and there's an opportunity to file amendments if those funding priorities have not already been included in the package that's proposed. So what I would recommend doing is just contacting your legislators as soon as you possibly can to get your funding priority onto their radar, and have a very honest conversation with them about what it would look like to get that priority included in the economic development bond bill, either before it's released for that vote, or as an amendment that is attached to the bill afterwards.
Yeah. Kelsey, just to thank you for answering that question. It's a great question, Temple. And just to like press that button a little bit further, the worst time to ask a legislator to file an amendment for the first time is when the window opens to file amendments, right? Because they're going to get a ton of requests. So what you want to do is you want to start having those conversations now and say, I know the governor just released her economic development bond bill. I know the legislature is going to take it up. When the time comes, can you file an earmark for this project that we've got? To have those conversations as soon as possible. All right. I'm just going to quickly, again, this is the lull, the quiet before the storm. The Ways and Means Committee has announced their schedule for hearings for the fiscal year 25 budget. Those will happen later this month and in a little bit into April. Here's the deal. So they have multiple hearings because there's a lot to talk about in the budget, and they usually have them across the Commonwealth. Unlike other hearings where anytime there's a hearing, there's an opportunity for the public to submit testimony or to sign up to testify. When it comes to the budget, they go in order. So every agency that receives, or every sort of government group that receives money from the government will be assigned a hearing to testify at. That includes the Mass Cultural Council. At that hearing, the Mass Cultural Council will request $25.5 million, which is in line with what the governor proposed. Those will be the majority of the hearings. They will then hold one public hearing for input and comments from the general public. That's usually held at the State House. Mass Creative has traditionally not testified at that hearing, mostly because the Mass Cultural Council does a fantastic job of testifying on their own. And we usually like to focus our efforts on relationship, talking directly to leadership or talking with elected officials. And then once, if it's necessary to file an amendment, working to mobilize all of us to make sure that we get enough co-sponsors on that amendment. So that's sort of how hearings work for the fiscal year 25 budget. It doesn't mean that if you feel very passionately, you shouldn't plan to testify or submit written testimony. That's absolutely fine. But that's sort of what's going to happen next. And then once those hearings are complete, the House committee will release their version. It'll get debated, right? That's when amendments get submitted, and then it'll be passed out of the House, moved to the Senate, same thing, and then it'll go to the governor, with the hope that that all happens by the end of July. All right, I'm going to stop sharing for a second and just see if there are other questions in the chat, or if anyone else has questions.
I have another question. Do you
Sure.
have any?
Can I just flag? So Carolyn, thanks for putting that webinar, that link for the webinar for Americans to the Arts. Just so we're clear, that's about earmarks on the federal level, which is also a possibility. But it is a little bit different. We have they have like a very formal process where you have to like submit by a deadline. But that's great. They did a great job with that webinar. So Temple, sorry.
No worries. I am curious if you have any inklings about who's going to be on this advisory council, and if you are going to be one of the people, and if there's anything that we should do to advocate for any of that.
Okay, yeah. So no, we don't know. We don't know who will be on it. We know who they named in the executive order to chair it. We, obviously the Mass Cultural Council will be on that, advisory committee. We've had some conversations with the administration about our participation. Obviously, if we're asked, we will serve. And I think the goal here, Mass Creative's sort of goal is always that whenever there's an opportunity for development of ideas or moving our sector forward, it's really important that the multiple perspectives of the sector are included in that. And so if we have the opportunity to submit recommendations, we'll do that as well. But, I think it's really exciting to see the governor say that we want to have this advisory committee. And then just to be the pragmatist that Mass Creative tends to be, a lot of advisory committees and councils get stood up. I think many of us still remember the Creative Economy Network that was stood up during the Patrick administration. And a lot of good happened to that, but there's a short window. I hate to use the whale metaphor again. So one of the things I think, Temple, is as that advisory council kind of gets rolling, there will probably be opportunities for for contributing information, and then whatever recommendations come out of that, we're going to need to push and advocate for. So that'll be in way down the path, but that's what we know right now. Thanks. All right, other questions? Yes, Maureen.
Good morning, everyone. Maureen Hennessy from the Clark in the finally sunny Berkshires. After another very gray week. I have two questions, and so the first is on the federal level. Any word on the IMLS, Institute of Museum and Library Services funding? Is that being level funded too?
Maureen, I am so embarrassed. I would assume it is being level funded, but I will get back to everyone, or I'm sure someone on this call can answer that question. As the daughter of a librarian, I'm gonna have to wear the shame hat for the rest of the day. Yikes! Sorry,
we won't tell. And then my other question has to do with but some of what, and maybe this is what you were referring to, but I'm thinking of things like the ACE Act. If that's passed, that's for capital support for cultural
capital and program support.
Capital, yeah. But would that come out of the bond, or is the idea that would be a budget item every year?
Yeah, I think the way that the language of the bill is written, it would come out of the general fund, so it wouldn't come out of the bond bill. I think, again, just to get nitty gritty here, I think one of the things we may start to look at is, do we do we do like a two-phased approach? Like, do we say in this legislative session, we want to get the advisory group established and the like outline for the fund established, and then next year we'll work to try to get it funded? That's a strategy that's worked for other issues, particularly in tough budget years. That reminds me. So, thank you, Temple. It was great to have you here. Temple's just saying goodbye. Great questions. So this is a really tough budget year. It's, one of the things that happened was when the economic development bond bill was when they were trying to finish it up, they started asking for zero money or low money things that they could do, right? And that's a bond bill, not even we're talking about general fund spending, okay? So that makes bills in the creative sector agenda that do not have a money component so much more competitive, AKA the Creative Space Preservation Act, right? Because we know the Creative Space Preservation Act does not require any money. It's a definition change, and it allows municipalities to stand up trust funds, but it doesn't fund them. So that is an important thing to note in terms of as we're looking at our advocacy more moving forward, we're probably going to be talking more about those no money or low money asks that we can move forward. So that was a long-winded response to your question, answer to your question, Maureen. All right, other questions, other thoughts, other items, advocacy items that folks want everyone to know about? Or Chelsea reminded us that the American Alliance for Museums had their advocacy day down in DC recently. Advocacy days are happening in DC all right now. This is the season for them, which is great. Okay, so finally, I want to talk about one other thing, which is funding related. And it's funding mass creative. So, one of the things that has made us a really effective advocacy effort and helped us secure the wins that we need is that anytime I go in to meet with a legislator or meet with an elected official, or Kelsey or Richleen does, we're able to say that we represent 400 cultural organizations and 16,000 individuals who care deeply about the creative sector. And the way that we know what those numbers are is because folks, organizations, and individuals have paid for a membership into our Action Network. Now, it's important to note the Action Network is not a 501c3, it is a 501c4, which allows us to do that direct lobbying work that was so crucial during the pandemic. It funds that work directly. It does mean that if you are looking for to make a charitable donation, we're going to steer you right over to our 501c3, which supports things like we're doing right now, right? Which is the education and the training and the advocacy leadership development work that we do day in and day out. But right now we are we're looking to kick off our annual membership drive. So couple of things. Kelsey has made a delightful slide here where you can hold up your phone and very easily scan the QR code to get directly to our membership page. If that doesn't feel like the right move for you this morning, we're going to start sending out emails to let you know it's membership season, it's membership drive season. And if you as an organization need an invoice, we have actually created a self-service invoice form on our website. So if you go to the join page and you scroll down, it says, do you need an invoice? You can fill out a quick little form and automatically an invoice will be sent to you that you can send right along to your bookkeeper and say, please pay this. This is the most important membership we pay every year. So thank you so much. This not only does it make our work easier and possible, but frankly, for us as a staff, when we know you all have our backs to do this work, it makes the work even lighter. So we really appreciate you all helping us kick off our membership drive strong. All right. And Kelsey already put the link in the chat. Thank you, Kelsey. Okay, well, thank you all. This was a brief update, but we hope it was chock full of information that is useful to you as you continue as strong and confident advocates. Have wonderful weekends, and I hope you get outside.